So how did you get involved with personal computers?
Well, I ran into my first computer when I was about 10 or 11. And it's hard to remember back then, but I'm an old fossil now. I'm an old fossil. So when I was 10 or 11, it was about 30 years ago. And no one had ever seen a computer. To the extent that they'd seen them in movies, and there were these big boxes with whirring. For some reason, they fixated on the tape drives as being the icon of what the computer was, or flashing lights somehow. And so nobody had ever seen one. They're very mysterious, very powerful things that did something in the background. And so to see one and actually get to use one was a real privilege back then. And I got into NASA, Ames Research Center down here, and I got to use a time-sharing terminal. So I didn't actually see the computer, but I saw a time-sharing terminal. And in those days, again, it's hard to remember how primitive it was. There was no such thing as a computer with a graphics video display. It was literally a printer. It was a teletype printer with a keyboard on it. So you would keyboard these commands in, and then you would wait for a while, and then the thing would go, and it would tell you something out. But even with that, it was still remarkable, especially for a 10-year-old, that you could write a program in BASIC, let's say, or Fortran, and actually this machine would sort of take your idea and it would sort of execute your idea and give you back some results. And if they were the results that you predicted, your program really worked. It was an incredibly thrilling experience. So I became very captivated by a computer. And a computer to me was still a little mysterious because it was at the other end of this wire, and I'd never really seen the actual computer itself. And then I got tours of computers after that and saw the insides. And then I was part of this group at Hewlett-Packard. When I was 12, I called up Bill Hewlett, who lived in Hewlett-Packard at the time. And again, this dates me, but there was no such thing as an unlisted telephone number then, so I could just look in the book and look his name up. And he answered the phone, and I said, "Hi, my name's Steve Jobs. You don't know me, but I'm 12 years old, and I'm building a frequency counter, and I'd like some spare parts." And so he talked to me for about 20 minutes. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And he gave me the parts, but he also gave me a job working at Hewlett-Packard that summer. And I was 12 years old, and that really made a remarkable influence on me. Hewlett-Packard was really the only company I'd ever seen in my life at that age, and it formed my view of what a company was and how well they treated their employees. You know, at that time, I mean, they didn't know about cholesterol back then, but at that time, they used to bring a big cart full of donuts and coffee out at 10 o'clock every morning. Everybody would take a coffee and donut break, and just little things like that. It was clear that the company the company recognized that its true value was its employees. So anyway, things led to things with Hewlett-Packard, and I started going up to their Palo Alto research labs every Tuesday night with a small group of people to meet some of their researchers and stuff. And I saw the first desktop computer ever made, which was the Hewlett-Packard 9100. It was about as big as a suitcase, but it actually had a small cathode ray tube display in it, and it was completely self-contained. There was no wire going off behind the curtain somewhere. And I fell in love with it. And you could program it in BASIC and APL. And I would just, for hours, you know, get a ride up to Hewlett-Packard and just hang around that machine and write programs for it. And so that was the early days. And I met Steve Wozniak around that time too, maybe a little early, when I was about 14, 15 years old. And we immediately hit it off. He was the first person I'd met that knew more about electronics than I did. And so I liked him a lot. And he was maybe 5 years older than I. He'd gone off to college and gotten kicked out for pulling pranks, and was living with his parents and going to Deanne's of the local junior college. So we became fast friends and started doing projects together. We read about the story in Esquire magazine about this guy named Captain Crunch, who could supposedly make free telephone calls. You've heard about this, I'm sure. And we were captivated. how could anybody do this? And we thought it must be a hoax. And we started looking through the libraries, looking for the secret tones that would allow you to do this. And it turned out we were at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center one night, and way in the bowels of their technical library, way down at the last bookshelf in the corner bottom rack, we found an AT&T technical journal that laid out the whole thing. And that's another moment I'll never forget. When we saw this journal, we thought, my God, it's all real. And so we set out to build a device to make these tones. And the way it worked was, you know, when you make a long distance call, you used to hear doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo right in the background. They were tones that sounded like the touch tone you could make on your phone, but they were different frequencies, so you couldn't make them. It turned out that was the signal from one telephone computer to another, controlling the computers in the network. And AT&T made a fatal flaw when they designed the original telephone network, digital telephone network, was they put the signaling from computer to computer in the same band as your voice, which meant that if you could make those same signals, you could put it right in through the handset. And literally, the entire AT&T international phone network would think you were an AT&T computer. So after 3 weeks, we finally built a box like this that worked. And I remember the first call we made was down to LA, so one of Woz's relatives down in Pasadena. We dialed the wrong number, but we woke some guy up in the middle of the night, and we were yelling at him like, don't you understand? We made this call for free. And this person didn't appreciate that, but it was miraculous. And we built these little boxes to do blue boxing, as it was called. And we put a little note in the bottom of them. Our logo was, he's got the whole world in his hands. And they worked. We built the best blue box in the world. It was all digital, no adjustments. And so you could go up to a payphone and you could, you know, take a trunk over to White Plains and then take a satellite over to Europe and then go to Turkey, take a cable back to Atlanta, you know, and you could go around the world. You could go around the world 5 or 6 times because we learned all the codes for how to get on the satellites and stuff. And then you could call the payphone next door. And so you could shout in the phone, and after about a minute, it would come out the other phone. It was miraculous. And you might ask, well, what's so interesting about that? What's so interesting is that we were young, and what we learned was that we could build something ourselves that could control billions of dollars worth of infrastructure in the world. That was what we learned, was that us two, you know, we didn't know much. We could build a little thing that could control a giant thing. And that was an incredible lesson. I don't think there would have ever been an Apple computer had there not been blue boxing.
Well, I said you called the Pope. Yeah,
we did call the Pope. He pretended to be Henry Kissinger. And we got the number of the Vatican, and we called the Pope. And they started waking people up in the hierarchy, you know, I don't know, cardinals and this and that. And they actually sent someone to wake up the Pope. When finally we just burst out laughing, and they realized that we weren't Henry Kissinger. And so we never got to talk to the Pope, but it was very funny.
So the jump from blue boxes to personal computers, what sparked that?
Well, necessity, in the sense that there was time-sharing computers available. And there was a time-sharing company in Mountain View that we could get free time on. So, but we needed a terminal, and we couldn't afford one. So we designed and built one. And that was the first thing we ever did. We built this terminal. And so what an Apple I was really an extension of this terminal, putting a microprocessor on the back end. That's what it was. It was really kind of 2 separate projects put together. So first we built the terminal, and then we built the Apple I. And we really built it for ourselves because we couldn't afford to buy anything. And we'd scavenge parts here and there and stuff. And we build these all by hand. I mean, they'd take, 40 to 80 hours to build one. And then they'd always be breaking because there's all these tiny little wires. And so it turned out a lot of our friends wanted to build them too. And although they could scavenge most of the parts as well, they didn't have the sort of skills to build them that we had acquired by training ourselves through building them. And so we ended up helping them build most of their computers, and it was really taking up all of our time. And we thought, if we could make what's called a printed circuit board, which is a piece of fiberglass with copper on both sides that's etched to form the wires so that you could build a computer, you could build an Apple I in a few hours instead of 40 hours. If we only had one of those, we could sell them to all our friends for, as much as it cost us to make them and make our money back. And everybody be happy, and we'd say, we get a life again. So we did that. I sold my Volkswagen bus, and Steve sold his calculator, and we got enough money to pay a friend of ours to make the artwork to make a printed circuit board. And we made some printed circuit boards, and we sold some to our friends. And I was trying to sell the rest of them so that we could get our microbus and calculator back. And I walked into the first computer store in the world, which was the Byte Shop of Mountain View, I think, on El Camino. It metamorphosized into an adult bookstore a few years later. But at this point, it was the Byte Shop. And the person that ran that, I think his name was Paul Terrell. He said, I'll take 50 of those. I said, this is great. He said, but I want them fully assembled. We'd never thought of this before. So we then kicked this around. We thought, why not? Why not try this? And so I spent the next several days on the phone talking with electronics parts distributors. We didn't know what we were doing. And we said, look, here's the parts we need. We figured we'd buy 100 sets of parts, build 50, sell them to the Byte Shop for twice what it cost us to build them, therefore paying for the whole 100, and then we'd have 50 left, and we could make our profits by selling those. So we convinced these distributors to give us the parts on net 30 days credit. We had no idea what that meant. Net 30, sure, sign here. And so we had 30 days to pay them. And so we bought the parts, we built the products, and we sold 50 of them to the Byte Shop in Palo Alto and got paid in 29 days, and then went and paid off the parts people in 30 days. And so we were in business. But we had the classic Marxian profit realization crisis, in that our profit wasn't in a liquid currency. Our profit was in 50 computers sitting in the corner. So then all of a sudden we had to think, wow, how are we going to realize our profit? And so we started thinking about distribution. Are there any other computer stores? And we started calling the other computer stores that we'd heard of across the country, and we just kind of eased into business that way.
The third key figure in the creation of Apple was former Intel executive Mike Markkula. I asked Steve how he came aboard.
We were designing the Apple II, and we really had some much higher ambitions for the Apple II. Woz's ambitions were he wanted to add color graphics. My ambition was that it was very clear to me that while there were a bunch of hardware hobbyists that could assemble their own computers, or at least take our board and add the transformers for the power supply and the case and the keyboard and go get et cetera, go get the rest of the stuff. For every one of those, there were 1,000 people that couldn't do that, but wanted to mess around with programming. Software hobbyists. Just like I had been when I was, 10, discovering that computer. And so my dream for the Apple II was to sell the first real packaged computer, packaged personal computer, where you didn't have to be a hardware hobbyist at all. And so combining both of those dreams, we actually designed the product. And I found a designer, and we designed the packaging and everything. And we wanted to make it out of plastic, and we had the whole thing ready to go, but we needed some money for tooling the case and things like that. We needed a few $100,000. And this was way beyond our means. So I went looking for some venture capital. And I ran across one venture capitalist named Don Valentine, who came over to the garage, and he later said I looked like a renegade from the human race. That was his famous quote. And he said he wasn't willing to invest in us, but he recommended a few people that might. And one of them was Mike Markkula. So I called Mike on the phone, and Mike came over, and Mike had retired at about 30 or 31 from Intel. He was a product manager there and gotten a little bit of stock, and made like $1 million on stock options, which at that time was quite a lot of money. And he'd been investing in oil and gas deals and kind of staying home and doing that sort of thing. And he, I think, was kind of antsy to get back into something. And Mike and I hit it off very well. And so Mike said, okay, I'll invest after a few weeks. And I said, no, No, we don't want your money. We want you. So we convinced Mike to actually throw in with us as an equal partner. And so Mike put in some money, and Mike put in himself, and the three of us went off and we took this design that was virtually done with the Apple II and tooled it up and announced it a few months later at the West Coast Computer Fair.
What was that like?
It was great. We got the best. I mean, the West Coast Computer Fair was small at that time, but to us it was very large. And so we had this fantastic booth there. We had a projection television showing the Apple II and showing its graphics, which today look very crude, but at that time were by far the most advanced graphics on a personal computer. And I think, my recollection is we stole the show. And a lot of dealers and distributors started lining up, and we were off and running.
How old were you?
21.
21.
Yeah.
You're 21. You're a big success. You just sort of done it by the seat of your pants. You don't have any particular training in this. How do you learn to run a company?
Throughout the years in business, I found something, which was I'd always ask why you do things. And the answers you invariably get are, oh, that's just the way it's done. Nobody knows why they do what they do. Nobody thinks about things very deeply in business. That's what I found. I'll give you an example. When we were building our Apple I's in the garage, we knew exactly what they cost. When we got into a factory in the Apple II days, the accounting had this notion of a standard cost, where you'd kind of set a standard cost, and then at the end of a quarter, you'd adjust it with a variance. And I kept asking, well, why do we do this? And the answer was, well, that's just the way it's done. And after about 6 months of digging into this, what I realized was the reason you do it is because you don't really have good enough controls to know how much it costs. So you guess, and then you fix your guess at the end of the quarter. And the reason you don't know how much it costs is because your information systems aren't good enough. So, but nobody said it that way. And so later on, when we designed this automated factory for Macintosh, we were able to get rid of a lot of these antiquated concepts and know exactly what something cost to the second. So in business, a lot of things are, I call it folklore. They're done because they were done yesterday and the day before. And so what that means is if you're willing to sort of ask a lot of questions and think about things and work really hard, you can learn business pretty fast. It's not the hardest thing in the world.
Not rocket science.
It's not rocket science, no.
Now, when you were first coming in contact with these computers, inventing them, and before that working on the HP 9100, we talk about writing programs. Mm-hmm. What sort of programs? What do people actually do with these things?
See, what we did with them, well, I'll give you a simple example. When we were designing our Blue Box, we wrote a lot of custom programs to help us design it. And to do a lot of the dog work for us in terms of calculating master frequencies with subdivisors to get other frequencies and things like that. We used the computer quite a bit to calculate, how much error we would get in the frequencies and how much could be tolerated. So we used them in our work, but much more importantly, it had nothing to do with using them for anything practical. It had to do with using them to be a mirror of your thought process, to actually learn how to think. In other words, I think the greatest value of learning I think everybody in this country should learn how to program a computer, should learn a computer language, because it teaches you how to think. It's like going to law school. I don't think anybody should be a lawyer, but I think going to law school would actually be useful because it teaches you how to think in a certain way, in the same way that computer programming teaches you in a slightly different way how to think. And so I view computer science as a liberal art. It should be something that everybody takes a year in their life. One of the courses they take is, learning how to program.
Yeah, but I learned APL, which, obviously is part of the reason why I'm going through life sideways.
Well, was it you look back and consider it an enriching experience that taught you to think in a different way or not?
No, not that particularly.
Okay.
Not other languages, perhaps more so.
Yeah.
I started with APL.
Uh-huh.
Obviously the Apple II was a terrific success.
Yeah.
Just incredibly so. And the company grew like Topsy and eventually went public, and you guys got really rich. What's it like to get rich?
It's very interesting. I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money. I think money is a wonderful thing because it enables you to do things. It enables you to invest in ideas that don't have a short-term payback and things like that. But especially at that point in my life, it was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the company, the people, the products we were making, what we were going to enable people to do with these products. So I didn't think about it a great deal. I never sold any stock, and just really believed that the company would do very well over the long term.
Central to the development of the personal computer was the pioneering work being done at Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, which Steve first visited in 1979.
I had 3 or 4 people who kept bugging me that I ought to get my rear over to Xerox PARC and see what they were doing. And so I finally did. I went over there, and they were very kind, and they showed me what they were working on. And they showed me really 3 things. But I was so blinded by the first one that I didn't even really see the other 2. One of the things they showed me was object-oriented programming. They showed me that, but I didn't even see that. The other one they showed me was really a networked computer system. They had over 100 Alto computers, all networked, using email, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't even see that. I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. Now, remember, it was very flawed. What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this someday. It was obvious. I mean, you could argue about how many years it would take. You could argue about who the winners and losers might be, but you couldn't argue about the inevitability of it. It was so obvious. You would have felt the same way had you been there.
Those are the exact words that Paul Allen used.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it was obvious.